Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going on a journey through the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer,
A German pastor and theologian.
whose story is really captivating. It reads like a thriller. In fact,
Yeah.
our guide for this deep dive is the book Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, Spy by Eric Metaxas.
It's a biography, of
Right.
course. But it's really so much more than just dates and places you know.
Right.
Metaxas reveals Bonhoeffer as this man of such deep conviction, who wrestled with some really incredibly complex moral dilemmas in the face of,
Nazi tyranny.
Yeah, and we're going to uncover some of those turning points today, the events that shaped his thinking
Right.
and ultimately led him to make choices that I think most of us can barely fathom.
Tough choices, for sure.
But to understand those choices, we need to start at the beginning. And Bonhoeffer's family was anything but ordinary.
Oh, yeah. Just imagine a household constantly buzzing with intellectual debate.
Yeah. His father was a leading neurologist, and his mother came from a lineage of theologians and academics.
Yeah.
So they created this incredibly stimulating environment.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that young Dietrich developed such a sharp mind.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
And it wasn't all just philosophical musings and high-minded discussions, though.
No.
World War I erupted when Bonhoeffer was just a boy.
A boy.
And the impact of that war, and in particular the loss of his brother, Walter, on the front lines, that left a lasting mark on him.
Absolutely. That experience really planted these seeds of doubt about the justification for violence, and these seeds would later blossom into his initial pacifist leanings. It's a theme that you see running throughout the book, How do you reconcile faith with the reality of a world that is seemingly bent on destruction?
Yeah, it's a great question. And here's where it gets really fascinating. Despite growing up in a family that leaned more towards secularism,
Right.
Bonhoeffer felt this undeniable pull towards theology. It was like this inner voice calling him to a different path.
And he listened. He pursued those theological studies in Berlin, Rome, Barcelona.
Wow.
Immersing himself in all these diverse perspectives, engaging with some of the most brilliant minds of his time.
Yeah.
This exposure to a wider world of thought really played a pivotal role in shaping his own unique theological voice.
And what a voice it was. Even in his early writings, you can see Bonhoeffer grappling with these profound questions about the very nature of faith. He was drawn to this idea of religionless Christianity, this concept that true faith isn't bound by rituals or institutions,
Right.
but rather by the way you live your life in relation to others.
And it was an idea that really challenged a traditional church and sparked debate. Bonhoeffer believed that. The essence of Christianity really lay in embodying the teachings of Christ in everyday actions and interactions, not just in adhering to dogma.
Right. And this ties directly into his concept of costly grace. He argued that true faith demands more than just accepting theological concepts. It requires this deep personal commitment and a willingness to live out your beliefs, even when it's difficult, even when it comes at a price.
Yeah, he contrasted that with what he called cheap grace, which he saw as the superficial acceptance of faith without any real change in behavior or willingness to sacrifice. He believed that cheap grace ultimately cheapened the true meaning of Christianity.
Right. And this distinction between cheap grace
Yeah.
and costly grace becomes this recurring theme in Bonhoeffer's life, especially as he faces the rising tide of Nazism.
Right.
So imagine living in Germany during that time,
Oh, yeah.
witnessing the increasing oppression, the fear, the propaganda that permeated every aspect of society.
And Bonhoeffer, unlike many others, refused to remain silent. He was among the first to publicly and passionately oppose Hitler's ideology. And in his essay, The Church and the Jewish Question, which we'll link in the description for those of you interested in reading it, he issued this really radical call to action, urging the church to not only speak out against the persecution of Jews,
Right.
but to actively protect them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty dangerous stance to take.
It was, absolutely. But he felt this moral obligation to act. And his involvement in the confessing church further solidified his opposition to the Nazi regime. This was a group of pastors and theologians who were really fighting against the Nazification of the German church, the attempt to distort Christian beliefs to align with the Nazi agenda.
Right.
They saw how insidious that ideology was, how it was trying to corrupt even the most sacred institutions. And they believed that true Christianity could never be compatible with the racist and totalitarian views of the Nazi Party.
And that belief, that unwavering commitment, to his faith in his conscience, would lead him down a path that few could have predicted. We'll delve deeper into Bonhoeffer's remarkable journey when we return. So, Bonhoeffer's outspoken criticism and involvement in the confessing church, well, it led to his arrest. But his time in Tegel prison wasn't quite what you might imagine.
Yeah, not some, like, dank, dark dungeon you see in the movies. Metaxas describes it as being surprisingly comfortable.
Comfortable?
At least initially, you know.
Right. So, Bonhoeffer had a certain degree of freedom there.
Yeah, a certain degree he was allowed to, you know, read, write, correspond with his loved ones, and even engage in theological discussions with fellow prisoners. It was actually during this period that he really delved deep into his most influential work, ethics.
Okay, this wasn't just some casual journaling, though, right? I mean, ethics. Is Bonhoeffer wrestling with the most profound moral and philosophical questions imaginable, right? All while living under the shadow of tyranny.
Yeah, exactly. In ethics, he's really grappling with the complexities of faith and action in a world where those traditional ethical frameworks seem to just crumble in the face of unimaginable evil.
Right.
He's probing the very nature of good and evil, the role of the church in a society gone mad, and the true meaning of Christian discipleship in times of crisis.
It's just so striking to me that he's not writing from some detached academic ivory tower, right?
No.
I mean, he's living through these very questions, experiencing firsthand the consequences of standing up for what he believes in.
Yeah, and he weaves his own experiences in, you know, his observations of the Nazi regime.
Right.
And his growing understanding of, you know, the human capacity for both, you know, profound love and devastating cruelty. It makes ethics both a philosophical treatise and this deeply personal reflection on the human condition.
And amidst all of this, I mean, in the midst of this struggle with, you know, these weighty philosophical and theological questions, we see this incredibly humanizing aspect of Bonhoeffer's life, his love story with Maria von Wedemeyer.
Yeah, their relationship really adds this layer of tenderness and vulnerability to his story. Their letters, you know, exchanged during his imprisonment, they reveal this man who's deeply in love, you know, longing for companionship, finding solace in these shared moments of joy and hope, even as the world around them is crumbling.
Yeah, it's just this reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit seeks connection, seeks love, seeks those glimmers of light that sustain us through adversity.
Right.
But as we know, Bonhoeffer's story takes a darker turn. His transfer from Tegel to a Gestapo prison signals this shift, this tightening grip of the Nazi regime.
The Gestapo prison was a far cry from that sort of relative comfort of Tegel. It was here that Bonhoeffer really came face to face with the brutality of the Nazi regime, you know, experiencing firsthand the harsh realities of imprisonment under a totalitarian state.
And it's in this setting, surrounded by fellow resistors and those deemed enemies of the state, that Bonhoeffer becomes even more deeply entangled in the movement to overthrow Hitler.
Right, you have this incredible mix of individuals, military leaders, pastors, theologians, intellectuals, all united in their opposition to Nazism, and all willing to risk their lives for a chance to restore justice and sanity to their country.
Yeah.
And the July 20th plot, the attempt to assassinate Hitler, that was really the culmination of those efforts.
This was a pivotal moment, not just for Bonhoeffer, but for the entire resistance movement. His involvement, though not directly in the bombing itself, was undeniable.
Right.
And when the plot failed, the consequences were swift and brutal.
Yeah. The Nazis unleashed a wave of terror, rounding up anyone suspected of involvement, real or imagined. And for Bonhoeffer, already imprisoned, this meant a death sentence. His connection to the plot had sealed his fate.
His final days were spent shuttled between concentration camps, witnessing really the depths of human depravity, enduring unimaginable suffering. Yet even in these horrific conditions, his spirit remained unbroken. It's a testament to the strength of his faith and his unwavering belief in the goodness of humanity.
Yeah. There are accounts of Bonhoeffer ministering to his fellow prisoners during that time, offering comfort and solace, sharing his faith and his hope, even as his own life hung precariously in the balance.
It's a testament to the power of the human spirit to transcend even the most horrific circumstances.
Absolutely.
And then just weeks before the liberation of the camps, just as the tide was turning against the Nazi regime, Bonhoeffer was executed. It's such a moment of profound tragedy.
Yeah.
You know, a life cut short, a voice silenced. But it's also a moment that speaks volumes about the kind of man Bonhoeffer was.
Yeah, his death, though heartbreaking, it serves as this powerful symbol of resistance, this challenge to all who confront, injustice and oppression. A reminder that the fight for what's right is often fraught with risk, and sometimes the ultimate sacrifice.
Bonhoeffer's story isn't just some historical account. I mean, it's a call to action, right?
Yeah, it's an invitation, I think, to examine our own lives, to ask ourselves, what do we stand for, and how are we choosing to live in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain?
Right. It's like he provides this roadmap, not in a, literal sense,
Right.
but in the way that he approached those questions.
Yay.
His willingness to challenge the status quo, to speak truth to power, even when it was dangerous to do so.
Exactly. And he wasn't afraid to challenge the church itself when he felt like it was straying from its core values. He called out hypocrisy, urged action over complacency.
Right.
And reminded people that faith, it's not about blind obedience, it's about engaging with the world, seeking justice, and standing up for those who are marginalized and oppressed.
And his idea of costly grace, that seems particularly relevant now. I mean, it's so easy to fall into that trap of what he called cheap grace, right? The faith that requires little of us, that doesn't challenge our comfort or our convenience.
Yeah, Bonhoeffer forces us to confront that complacency, right? He reminds us that true discipleship requires sacrifice. Aligning our lives with the teachings of Christ means stepping outside our comfort zones, challenging injustice, and speaking out against what we know to be wrong, even when it's unpopular or difficult.
His story also highlights the importance of community, right? I mean, surrounding ourselves with people who share our values, will support us in our struggles. I mean, his deep friendships, his family, his love for Maria, all of these connections sustained him through these incredibly dark times.
Right. Those relationships were his anchors, his sources of strength and inspiration. And they remind us, I think, that we don't face our challenges alone. We need each other. We need those bonds of love and shared purpose to navigate the complexities of life and to sustain our hope in the face of adversity.
And speaking of hope, that's something that shines through, even in the darkest moments of Bonhoeffer's story. He never succumbed to despair, even while facing imprisonment and death. He held on to his faith, his belief in the goodness of humanity, and the promise of a future where love and justice would prevail.
Yeah, his life really stands as a testament to the power of faith, to transform not only individuals, but entire societies. He reminds us that, even small acts of courage, small acts of defiance, they can have this ripple effect, inspiring others and creating a force for change that can ultimately overcome even the most formidable obstacles.
So Bonhoeffer's story really is a call to action, an invitation to live lives of purpose and meaning, to embrace costly grace, and never, ever give up on the pursuit of a just and compassionate world.
And for those who want to delve deeper into this extraordinary life, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, Spy. You can find an affiliate link in the description. It's a book that will challenge you, inspire you, and stay with you long after you've turned that final page.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.